Matthew McCabe. Welcome to Miracle Voices. Each episode, we will be delving into stories of forgiveness, healing, and transformation that have come about from integrating the principles of the book, A Course in Miracles. If you want to learn more about A Course in Miracles, visit www.acim.org. If you'd like to visit the Miracle Voices site, please go to www.miraclevoices.org. If you feel inspired to make a love offering, please visit us at miraclevoices.org/donate. All donations go to support the work of the Foundation for Inner Peace, the publisher of A Course in Miracles. Now here's your program. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Miracle Voices. I'm your co-host, Matthew McCabe, and I'm here with my co-host, Judy Scutch-Whitson. Hi, Judy. How you doing?
I am doing so very well, Matthew, and really looking forward to this particular exchange with Carol Howe.
I know, we get the best guests here on Miracle Voices. Carol Howe, welcome to Miracle Voices.
Thanks a million. I'm so looking forward to this.
Wow, Carol, there's a lot to say here. I'm trying to think of the best way to introduce you. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and journey and how you came to find the Course and got connected with Judy.
Okie dokie. Well, we'll zip through the first 40 years or so by saying that when I was a little kid, maybe 4 or 5, I already thought, something's not right here. Something is missing. However, one at a 5 or 6-year-old has that kind of an adult awareness. And so from early on, I've been searching around, was fortunate to be born into a metaphysically friendly household. So we had whatever was available at the time, like Edgar Cayce stuff and non-traditional healing and so on. And in any event, so I became more and more and more immersed in that, knowing there was something missing. My big mistake those first years was thinking I was missing information. So I read and read and read and read and read. And then finally, along comes the first edition of New Realities magazine that some house guest sent us as a house present. And there was that marvelous article with Judy and Jerry and everybody, and it included the introduction to the text. And when I read that introduction to the text, I knew throughout my whole being, my search is now over. Whatever is in here, this is what I'm looking for. And that's been true ever since.
Wow.
That's the short version.
Okay. And so kind of what happened after that? How did you start to integrate it into your life?
I was immersed in it. It became really the most important thing besides raising my little boys, who were 5 and just turned 5 and almost 7 when the Course entered my life. And aside from doing the things that I needed to do to run a household and be a mother, I devoted every possible spare moment to reading and rereading and rereading, because once again, my error in the beginning was thinking this has the information I'm looking for. Only a little while later did I realize that this is a reprogramming device. This is about completely, dramatically changing our minds and reprogramming a lot of that stuff that got, from the time and space point of view, programmed in before we were 3 years old. Not maliciously, just inevitably because of the way brains work. So between the assimilating the material, I started, because I'm kind of a teacher at heart, I started having classes and getting people together, and then the rest is history. I've spent the past 40, this coming month of August will be my 44th anniversary with the Course. And by the time I'd been at it for 2 years or less, I did my very first class. I had run a study group before that because I didn't know enough to teach a class, but I took a deep breath, and about 42 years ago this summer taught my very first class. And I've been doing totally devoted between classes and workshops and centers and writing and talking endlessly ever since about the Course, because I think it's the most important document on the planet.
Carol, on the timeline, when was it that Bill and I came to Denver to give a talk and you and he met?
That was in May of 1978. And that was a meeting that, first of all, I shouldn't have known about. I got a brochure from an organization that I'd never heard of before nor since. But here was the amazing thing. As you recall, it was May, and they had the place set up outdoors, which
Yes.
but it didn't say anything on the brochure that it was going to be outdoors, which is a little weird, because May evenings in Denver can be cold. So I came prepared to be inside an auditorium. So I had a very lightweight sweater on. And as you remember, it was a big deal outside. And at some point, and for those who don't know, Judy is a fantastic and compelling speaker. So I should make sure everybody knows that, who possibly have not had the opportunity to hear you speak, although, of course, on the podcast, they can a little bit. So at some point, I thought, I am just freezing to death out here. And so I just looked for the nearest door I could walk in. So I walked in, and there, over in the corner, all by himself, was a tall, handsome man. And I knew it was Bill Thetford. So I went up to him and introduced myself, and we had a little chat for about 10 minutes. And then apparently the whole thing came to an end. Everybody else was freezing to death. And that was the end of that. And I was silent all the way home. I felt such inexplicable connection with this man. So I was nearly speechless all the way home. Now, I am rarely speechless, but I was on that night. And one thing led to another, and I ended up the next year, I'm leaving out a whole lot of this, writing Bill on behalf of a good friend who was going to be in Tiburon. And to my utter astonishment, I answer the phone on Halloween afternoon. I'm getting my little boys ready to go out. And here is Bill's beautiful voice saying, "Yes, I would be happy to meet with your friend. And are you going to come out too?" I was just like, I didn't know. At first, the polite Southern girl in me said, "Oh, no, this is just for Jason." And then the next morning I thought, what is the matter with me? Of course I will. So I did. And you remember, Judy, or you may not remember, that one of the several evenings I was there, Jason and I were meeting with you and Bob, and you said, "I know why you're here." She said, "Bill needs to be socialized. He has spent the past 20 years all involved with the course." And so she said, "I now bequeath you, Bill." Which I loved. I had never been bequeathed a person before.
Well, of course, there's background to that too, but just a little comment, Carol. Yes, Bill was kind of a recluse.
Yes.
And he and Helen appointed me to go out when people were asking for someone to speak about A Course in Miracles. They refused to do it. They said they were not public figures vis-a-vis A Course in Miracles, since both the scribes said they were not public figures. Right. And Ken Wapnick had at that time a very pronounced stutter. I was the one who was appointed to do this. And in the very beginning, I just dragged Bill along with me, hoping that he'd answer some questions for people and be visible. After all, he was the one who asked. There must be a better way, and I want to find it. So this was his course. He not only was that, he was the co-scribe. So Carol meeting him, and he did tell me about that. He had met this really lovely lady and told me a little bit about her. And when you came out, I recognized you, whatever that means. I recognize you as having a very integral part in his life. It felt as if we were two sisters sharing part of him in order to help him on his way. Yeah.
Yes, that is exactly right. And I loved being I love being the little sister here. I was the greatest honor in my life was getting involved with everybody related to the course, and I still treasure it more than I can ever say.
Yeah.
Well, you did certainly influence his life tremendously, and I don't want to get out of sequence here for you, but I just want to, before I forget, to say I don't think he would have had anyone else write about him because, number one, he was shy. Number two, he was extremely modest and humble. And number three, he knew that what you would write about him would be the truth as he had told it to you.
And an interesting addition to that, Judy, is because Bill, on a number of occasions, came to stay with my family. He came to Denver, and then I would come out to California and so on. And on one of those visits, after the kids had gone off to school, he said, I think there's some kind of a project that we're supposed to do together, but we couldn't figure out what on earth would that be. The course hadn't been out long enough to write about it or anything else. And because he was an extreme introvert, and since I tend to operate at the opposite end of the spectrum, we said, well, we're just going to have to table this. We both had the sense of it. And, after he passed away and after things unfolded to write his biography, I knew this is our project. Just because he was on one side of the veil and I was on the other didn't mean that it wasn't our joint project. And to make sure everybody knows this was a joint project, this was the little thing I have to tell everybody because it involves you and me. And it's this. Close to the end of writing, and of course it was a huge project. There was so much research and interviewing everybody and rewriting. And all along, I would say, Bill, just make sure that I know you're there. And I got a number of signs, so to speak, that were really quite specific. So I'm within days of calling this finished. And I said, okay, Bill, I need one last for sure sign that you're right here and this is our joint project. And instantly into my mind comes this sentence. He said, ask Judy about the plaid dress. And it's like, yikes, that is a very, very specific comment. And in fact, it was so specific, I did nothing about it for a couple of days because I thought, if I write Judy about a plaid dress and she says, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, then I don't know. It's like my balloon might have burst or something. So in any event, you may remember you wrote me back an email and said, yes, indeed. And you sent me the picture of you in the plaid dress and your baby sister for your first formal photograph together. Now, how in the world could anybody doubt when you get a message like that?
I was kind of shocked, I remember, because it was a very personal thing. But
Yes.
I think, doesn't it seem to you that's the way it happens? We have talked on this podcast before, and certainly on webinars, that there is no death and that the continuum, the connection of love continues.
Absolutely.
And, my husband passed away almost 4 years ago. And I feel there isn't a day in which I haven't, in some cute, quirky way, like the plaid dress, heard from him. And so here, me getting this question from you, and I'm thinking, what in the world is she talking about? And I suddenly remembered that.
Yes. And you see, I didn't tell you, oh, by the way, I'm testing to see if Bill is really talking to me. I just said, does a plaid dress mean anything to you? And now really think of the billions and millions of things that could have been said. And when there was no doubt in my mind, when I said, Bill, are you really, really here? With no hesitation, across comes the thought, ask Judy about the plaid dress. Now, I'm still kind of blown away by that.
Well, I am too, because it had many meanings on many levels for me. So when something like this happens, I notice some kind of communication. It's so much more broad and at the same time so much more pointed than we can possibly imagine. As the British would say, you get gobsmacked.
Yes, that is exactly right. That is exactly right. Oh, it's been quite a trip, hasn't it?
It sure has, honey.
Well, Carol, we normally like to ask guests about a specific story of healing and forgiveness, but I thought before we ask you about one that stands out to you, that I might read just a small section from your book, Never Forget to Laugh, about forgiveness.
Okay.
It's on page 159 and 160. And then here it is. Perhaps we should call forgiveness process X to distinguish it from the misinformation we have learned. To paint a mental picture, imagine a thatch of many little twigs, sticks, and grass, like a bird's nest or the roof of a building found in many parts of the world. The thatch, being tightly woven, is strong and impenetrable. All those little sticks and twigs, for our purposes, represent our incessant train of thoughts, judgments, future plans, grievances, regrets, defenses, learned behavior designed for our physical and psychological survival, worries, self-images, roles we play, and pictures about how life is supposed to be. This omnipresent complex of thoughts to which we are seriously addicted has become like a solid wall that seems to surround us, separating us from the direct experience of life in the moment. We think about life rather than experience it directly. Any thoughts about that, Carol?
Well, I think it's accurate. I think it's like if we realize that at any given moment, there's always only a binary choice about where our attention will go. It either is, and this is the case for most of us most of the time, it's either on the care and maintenance, the protection and promotion of the story of me, the self-concept, the ego. The chapter 31 is very clear. It says, you think you came without a self and you had to build one when you came along. So it talks a lot about that building of the self-concept, so to speak. And the only other choice is like that beautiful prayer of Bill's, which is, I'm here to listen to my guidance. I'm here to follow my own inclinations to be helpful. I'm here to listen. In other words, it's not like at any given moment we have lots of choices. We've always only got two. And the second thing that is so important about that, about the being in the moment, is the whole issue of forgiveness is all around how do we let go of our guilt? The Course, if you were going to sum all those words up in just like a handful of words, it would be, you believe you're guilty and you aren't. You think you've ruined yourself and destroyed yourself and are a real problem on the planet and the universe. And that's not true. But since a lot of that is unconscious and all of it is untrue, relationships will help you see how you're hurting yourself. So it's like, okay, I'm much of the care and maintenance of my ego side of the only two choices at any given moment that I can choose from is because we carry guilt with us. And a lot of it is unconscious and we don't even know it's there. Some of it we do, but not all. And so our options to become more and more aware of, I want to be dedicated to love, to guidance, to following my intuition, to how in the world can I be truly helpful in this moment with whatever the circumstances are, whoever I'm with. And if we can begin to see that my attention is always only, but on one side of that or the other, I can just become more aware, when I'm following my intuition, when I'm following my guidance, when I'm really wishing to do all I can for the whatever or whoever's in front of me, that I feel a lot better than when I am engaged in self-promotion. So I can just begin to see the results of those two ways of focusing my attention. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. Any comments from you there, Judy?
Yeah, I was thinking as Carol was saying all of this and giving a very good, as boiling down in as few words as possible, a very good overview of forgiveness, that we certainly have two voices within. One speaks for the ego, which we made. The other speaks for God, which is our creator. And we choose which voice we want to hear every single solitary time.
Yes.
In choosing those voices, we can tell by the results immediately as we get more and more aware, as we become open to the philosophy of A Course in Miracles. Then we can see and feel almost the moment we make this choice. The wonderful thing about it is if we make the wrong choice, which is certainly for separation, for hatred, for judgment, we can always correct it and make the right choice. And I remember reading something that I think is very apt here, and it's from the Course on chapter 17, I believe. And it goes right in with what Bill called. Bill had keywords and some very funny expressions that he made up that entertained us all the time, but also entertained him. He called forgiveness celestial amnesia.
Indeed.
Celestial amnesia. And this is, I came across this, and I always call this the celestial amnesia quote from the Course. It says, "To forgive is merely to remember only the loving thoughts you gave in the past and those that were given you. All the rest must be forgotten. Forgiveness is selective remembering based on your selection." I'm sorry, based not on your selection. In other words, if we're selecting through the ego, not a good idea. If we're selecting through the Holy Spirit, the inner guide, the higher teacher, the voice for God, very good. So its forgiveness is a selective remembering based not on your selection.
Well, exactly right. And I think of all of the gazillions of people that I have been involved with, either doing private counseling or classes or anything else, the single biggest obstacle to putting all of this wisdom into practice, so to speak, is the idea that the problem really is the other. Whatever the who or whatever the other is, we're convinced that the other is the cause of our difficulty or of our pain or of our loss or of our whatever it is. And so we've all been taught in our early days. I don't think I've ever run into one single person who's ever been correctly taught in our early times that forgiveness is not pardoning. It's not, okay, you did something unkind or inappropriate or whatever, and I'm somehow supposed to be okay with that. I watch people struggle trying to do that totally impossible thing all the time. So we have to reorient to how the person out here is merely giving me very exact, specific information about the guilt I am holding on to. I'll do a very short little story to give you just an example of how this all works. In my very, very early days of the Course, when I'm just getting my feet wet, comparatively speaking, my kids were, as I say, about 5 and 7, and this was within this first few months after the Course. Well, we had some next door neighbors, and the daughter in the family was our babysitter, and there was another child in the middle. But then the youngest child was a little boy, and I didn't like this kid at all. He was 5 years older than my older son, and he would climb over the back fence. There was a 6-foot fence, but he had stuff stacked up in his side of the yard, so he could go over there and he'd jump over the fence. And he wasn't a malicious, cruel child or anything, but he was very big for his age. And pretty soon there would be, I don't know, wrestling around or something, and somebody would get hurt and somebody would cry. And then I just found everything about him annoying. And I talked to his mother, who was very patient with me, and so on and so forth. And I would say, Hank, it's time for you to go home now. And I'd look outside, he would have climbed over the fence, and there he was again. It was like, I finally told my husband, I can't believe this. I said, I think we're going to have to move. See, now this is the perfect example of he's the problem. And I couldn't figure out why he didn't find this boy annoying, which he didn't. So finally, as a brand new, comparatively speaking, student of the course, I said to myself, what is it about this boy that I can't stand? Why do I want him to just go away? And I heard myself say, he's too hard on my kids. And then I thought, I've had a fear that I've been too hard on my kids, not wrestling around on the floor with them, but maybe I've been too demanding. Maybe I've expected too much of them. And back, when my kids were little, there was not all the information about the proper way to help children regulate their emotions and so on. And my parents certainly knew zero about that. So I didn't have good modeling for that. And when I realized that the very same phrase I used, he's too hard on my kids, is what I was blaming myself for. And I thought, you know what? I'm sure I have made a gazillion mistakes, but nobody has tried any harder to be the right kind of mother to my children than I have done. And I just need to relax with this I'm too hard on my kids thing. And I honestly did. And you know what happened? And this is the model for how it works every time. Hank vanished. After all those months of trying to run him off and have him not come over, all of a sudden, he was just busy elsewhere. I would go starting the very next day. I sometimes would go for a month and not ever even lay eyes on him. When I dropped my guilt about not being a good enough mother, my mirror that was standing out here reflecting that back to me, he was standing there not to drive me crazy, but as an emissary that said, this is a specific that you are feeling guilty about and blaming yourself for. Let it go. I did. He vanished. And as his sister got to be older and was no longer around to be our babysitter on those few occasions when our kids were not quite old enough to be left by themselves for whatever reason, I'd have him come over and babysit. Everything was healed. I took my guilt out of the equation and the problems vanished. And that's the way it works 100% of the time.
Okay, so you forgave yourself for the feeling of guilt that you were too hard on your kids.
Yes.
And Frank is the symbol kind of orbiting around you, telling you that it needs to be forgiven. But it's kind of an indirect way. So you don't really know until you stop and ask.
That is the problem. In other words, that's what I spend all my time trying to re-educate people, that our problem people, quote unquote, that are cycling around out here in our lives, you can call them triggers, you can call them messengers. The most accurate thing is they are literally being mirrors. It is exact as when you stand in front of your bathroom mirror, and if you've got on your green shirt, you're going to see a green shirt in the mirror. And it would never occur to you to think that somehow you can make that disappear, or that you can change it by willpower, or you can do anything to it. But if we can reorient ourselves to the so-called other people out here, can literally be saving our lives by showing us specifically and directly what we are punishing ourselves for. Because don't forget, guilt is always a constant request for punishment, and it will always be answered. So we can't afford to have these false notions of, well, let's see, this guy is using this young man. It's like, well, I can't stand what he's doing, but I guess I'm going to have to be okay with it. It's like, that's crazy. First of all, it's impossible. And it entirely misses the point, is that he's my mirror. And that's why I tell people all the time, when you let go of whatever you're blaming yourself for, that you're seeing in the behavior and words of the people around you, one of three things will always happen. Either through some organic means, they won't be in your life anymore. It's not because you will have successfully run them out on a rail. Maybe if it was at work, they get transferred. Maybe if it's somebody in the neighborhood, they disappear, whatever. Or they may still be in your life, but you'll go, for some reason, they just don't do that annoying thing anymore. Or three, they may still do the same behavior as before, but all of a sudden, all the charge has gone out of it and it doesn't bother you anymore. But it will be impossible for us to actually let go of our guilt and have the same thing going on out here in your life. That's not possible any more than the bathroom mirror and what you've got on can be at odds with one another. I have watched this work thousands of times, not only in my own life, but in a whole lot of other people's lives. And that's why I like to not call this forgiveness. I like to just call it release. What I'm doing is releasing my own guilt because I have misunderstood how things work. We don't feel guilty because we're evil. It's because we don't understand a great deal. And so this is a benign process. So our so-called enemies are essential to our discovering very clearly what I'm doing to call up punishment for myself so I can stop, not so I can go, oh yeah, I get this is how it is, but I'm going to keep on punishing myself. That's not smart. This is all in favor of our own freedom. And it guarantees it works every single time.
You know, Carol, so many people who are struggling with changing their minds and using the process called A Course in Miracles in order to do it. The Course in Miracles tells us very clearly that forgiveness is the key to happiness.
Absolutely.
Well, absolutely. We want to be happy. So forgiveness as the process of the key to happiness, I find, is so workable. Just as you say, it's a decision we make. It's the recognizing that we have layers and layers and layers of guilt that we've grown up with and holding and cherished to ourselves. And we can't really do anything about it. It's too hard. So what is a shortcut? Saying that, yes, I would like to see this situation differently, which is shifting your perception from fear, guilt, etc., in the situation to seeing only love. At that point, for myself, I know what I do as a shortcut. I close my eyes or I stop whatever I'm doing when I recognize that I am in a negative frame of mind, and I say immediately, please, God, Holy Spirit, Jesus, whatever we want to call our higher teacher, our inner self, please help me see this differently. Exactly. Because we don't know how to see it differently, just as the story you told about the little boy next door. But finally, when you started to recognize what you were doing, that you were a part of this equation, and actually the whole lesson was there for you. He was a mirror of yourself.
Yes.
You saw it differently.
Absolutely. And you see, since we see others, quote unquote, through, like if you have glasses that have got blue lens in them, every place you look, it's going to be blue. Well, if you've got glasses with yellow lenses in them, every place you look, it's going to be yellow. We relate to people and the world through the lenses of what we believe about ourselves, what we think we deserve, and so on. And when we're blaming ourselves for many things, we will automatically see that very same worst thing in people out there. So one of the really major ideas to cultivate is if we can keep, there are two important things. One is my world is like an MRI of my soul. In the latter part of the text, it says the world is the ego's self-portrait. It uses that language. It says your world, not the world, your world is your own programmed sense of the story of me. Those inner thoughts and beliefs show up as the details of your world. It's like nothing could be quite as clear as that. Well, offended as far as what it tries to tell us, but the rationale for being able to go, you mean, can I really change my mind now? Is this, and this is another really important key that I find is so unknown to most people. And that is, although the Course says the past doesn't exist and this moment is the only moment there is, we go, yeah, but like, what does that really mean? Well, what it really means is this, to elaborate a little bit, the moment that a word is spoken or a deed is accomplished, it vanishes. We don't have to make it vanish by some sort of mysterious means. It automatically ceases to exist. And yet every one of us on the planet, so far as I can tell, have grown up with the belief that, oh my gosh, I've done something else wrong, and that it's being added to kind of this growing pile of transgressions that's following along behind me, and that somehow I can't escape from, I'm guilty because I've done all of these things wrong. And first of all, there's no big pile of transgressions. Everything ceases the moment that it's over with. The other thing that relates to that is because of that belief, we have cause and effect as kind of like a horizontal line that I'm experiencing today because of what happened back then. That's not how it works. Cause and effect are a package deal together in this moment. Nothing from the past exists. It can't get me. Nothing from the future can get me. Right here in this moment I'm experiencing is the point of power, because here is where I can go, well, if I feel distress now, the cause is now, not yesterday, not when I was 2, not anything else. And what that is that distresses everybody that's in the present, it's not past behavior or words, but in our very earliest days. This is the time and space level of things, not the metaphysical level of things. Because of the way the brain develops, every single person ends up misunderstanding what's happening in those early times when we don't know ourselves as a person having an experience. We just know we are experience until our left brain comes online at about 3 years old. And in those early years, here's where, shall we say, the tragic misunderstanding occurs, because we're just kind of swimming around in the energy that we're in. And everybody ends up with a belief, but it's been there so long, we think it's a truth because it's been there as far back as we can remember, a belief that somehow we're defective, somehow we're unworthy, somehow we're unimportant, somehow we can't do things right. And although our actual words and deeds have vanished, it's like we keep, because we don't know that this is just a falsehood, we keep bringing forward or kind of refreshing into every moment that we're in these beliefs about ourselves that are that are the heart, so to speak, of the guilt. We fear that we've ruined ourselves and that we've made ourselves unworthy and blah, 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 whatever particular adjectives. It's surprising for thousands and thousands of people, there are about 8 different words that everybody seems to come up with that they really fear are true about themselves. And it's those beliefs in this moment that's kind of contaminating this moment and causing my distress, whatever it might be. And so the whole purpose of this incredible Course in Miracles with the lessons is we're reprogramming by not trying to understand the lessons. As I tell everybody, they're not to be understood or figured out. They're to be literally practiced, where your attention is focused on whatever that lesson is, because it is steadily reprogramming your brain from I'm unworthy or I'm undeserving or I've hurt these people or here's what's the matter with me to I am as God created me. I am still the loving presence that I am, and all of the different ways that that message is given throughout the 365 lessons. So this incredible teaching kind of takes us by the hand when we understand that that's what the lessons are for. So the problem is a lot of people try to learn the lessons rather than this is material that I am to take in, focus my attention on, and grow new neural networks where I'm going to begin to think of myself more as deserving and good and helpful. And yes, I make mistakes, but they're mistakes and not crimes. And I'm steadily undoing that the early beliefs about myself that I think is actually the truth. And gradually, and every time I shift, every time I let go of an old belief and I think more highly of myself, I'm not talking about ego self-aggrandizement. I'm talking about of the self that we really are. Life immediately reflects that. Things get better. Relationships get healed. The financial problems seem to somehow mysteriously disappear. And anyway, it's the most amazing course in the world. And I think I wish everybody alive were able to avail themselves of this marvelous teaching. That if we could go, okay, nothing I've ever said and done in the past has the slightest thing to do with anything. Right now, I'm going to focus my attention on being as kind and as appropriate and as understanding, not only with whoever I'm dealing with, but with myself. I must specifically include myself in who I treat with tremendous love and kindness, because we all deserve only that.
Carol, that is so beautifully put. And it brings up for me a sort of a shortcut that you actually alluded to. And there are no shortcuts to practice. You're absolutely correct. But there are shortcuts to thinking to remind yourself to practice. And you use the word story. Our past is a story we've made.
Yes.
We've each made our own story. I can say we made it very carefully, but we weren't even conscious.
Exactly.
We heaped incident upon incident, and it's what we think we are and what we've made. Letting go of that story is so important. Yes. The Course says in one of his lessons, the past is over. It can hurt me not. The past is over. So in my mind, I literally take a very beautiful scissors and I just cut the ribbon of the story and let it go. Guess what? It not only doesn't hurt, but what rushes in to fill it is this wonderful sense of well-being, or as we can say, the key to happiness.
Yes, absolutely. And it's foolproof. It's not like, well, this sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. It works 100% of the time. I could regale you for the next month with stories of people who have had their lives just.
Give us one or two. Give us your favorite. I think you have many favorite forgiveness stories, but give us one.
Well, I think it's important for new people to give you a very short little what it isn't, because this is what everybody's plagued with in the beginning. So in the beginning, when I'm still thinking that forgiveness is, something out there is causing the problem, but I'm supposed to be okay with it. So a couple of months into the course, I said, okay, whatever happens when the kids come home from school today is going to be just fine with me. Oh, can you see what the setup for this is going to be? So on this day, Greg, the 7-year-old, says he's going to make Play-Doh. Well, okay, so we get out the ingredients and he's in the kitchen, and then he decides he's going to take his Play-Doh into the adjacent family room, which has got that big, thick shag carpet that used to be the thing to have. And it's like, I'm going, oh, this is not a good idea. There's going to be Play-Doh everywhere, but still thinking forgiveness. I'm just supposed to be okay with what goes on, and I'm not supposed to be upset by it, and so on. And then pretty soon some other little kids come over, and the Play-Doh manages to go outside, and they're making little spitball things and throwing Play-Doh at each other. So my husband comes home, and I'm weeping in the kitchen, and he said, "What's the matter?" And I said, "This forgiveness thing is so hard to do." Because my version of forgiveness was what everybody comes into this with thinking forgiveness is, which is whatever a somebody or does or says out here, they really have caused the problem. And I am somehow mysteriously supposed to get over it and be okay with it. And that's the myth of the year, basically, that needs to be eliminated, so to speak. But I think people need to hear that, because everybody that I know of who comes into the course really brings that old Sunday school version of the other people did it to me, and I'm just supposed to rise above it and be okay with it. No word about, well, how are you going to process the emotions that are, it's like that they're left out of the mix somehow. So if I were to give you not so much another story, but a very, very crucially important piece of information is that when we're finding ourselves upset, whether we realize it's self-induced or if I'm thinking it's a somebody out here that's caused this, in all cases, the first thing I need to do is to just set everything else aside and allow myself to feel what I actually feel. So far as I can tell, everybody all over the world has grown up with if you have an emotional response to something, there's something the matter with you and you shouldn't be having it. I've always said, if I could get the attention of everybody in the world, I would say one thing, and they would only listen to one thing, is do not make your own emotional nature the stepchild and try to force it away. We spend all of our lives running to our addictions, our distractions, everything to avoid feeling how we feel. You must allow yourself to feel how you feel so that the emotions can settle. I don't have time to tell you the chemistry of what happens, but until I settle how I feel, I can't think straight. I can't begin to sort out what's happening, what do I really believe or anything else, because I've got the whole frontal lobe of my brain has turned off, because I've got my stress response turned on. My emotions are just all over the place, and I literally can't think straight then. So when any kind of upset arises, and it doesn't matter what you think the cause is, everything else needs to be set aside first. And you must, you might say, reach out to your own emotional nature, the emotional experience you're having, whether it's anger, grief, whatever, and pull it toward you, which is counterintuitive, rather than trying to push it away. Because only then And only in that way will it resolve itself. And until it resolves itself, you can read A Course in Miracles or you can do whatever else, and it's just not going to do you any good as long as your emotions are still unresolved and unrecognized. So that's always step one or the prelude to anything else that needs to happen.
Oh, I'm thinking of the David Hawkins book, Letting Go. He describes kind of what you're talking about there, where the emotion comes up and you're just like, I don't want this. How do I get rid of it? And the emotions further the thoughts of such and such is to blame. This is the reason of the problem, because the emotions are there kind of pushing those thoughts. And he's in that process, he kind of elaborates on, you just surrender and don't try to resist that emotion. Just like you were saying,
Absolutely.
like the resistance causes that negative emotion to stick around.
Yes, it does. And it's because about 25 years ago, finally the research came in that has been presumed, but it was kind of finalized, is that when the stress response is turned on because the organism senses a threat, whether it's to the physical body, to the ego, to the, whatever it is, and when it turns on, all of those 1,200 or so chemicals that are going to prepare us to fight or flee or freeze are taken up into the cells of the body. And when they're taken up into the cells of the body, that is the literal cause at the time and space level of our emotions, whether it's anger, whether it's grief, whether it's despair, whatever it might be. And if I now make my emotions the enemy, like I don't want these, my brain goes, oh, here's another enemy. So now my emotions, which have been created because there was an enemy out there someplace, maybe somebody being mean to you from your perspective. But now if I make the emotions the enemy, then I'm in a closed loop, dumping in more chemicals, feeling more upset, resisting the upset, dumping in more chemicals.
Yeah.
You could spend years and years never getting out of that loop.
It's so true. And everybody knows that feeling. Exactly. You're stewing. They're telling yourself the story over again. How dare, oh my God, can you believe? Yeah.
And when you're experiencing whatever that emotional state is, you've just brought up a key point. You must stop the storytelling. In other words, whatever, you cannot be allowing yourself to feel how you feel, and also at the same time telling yourself from your perspective the story of what it's all about, because it's never about that. It's always about these beliefs we hold about ourselves. And you will get exactly nowhere if you try to process emotions and think at the same time. Those are mutually exclusive operations.
Wow. This has been such a rich conversation. I think we better have a continuation sometime. What do you think, Matt?
I agree. Excellent conversation here. This is like a master class in forgiveness. I feel so lucky to be a part of it. Well, Carol, I want to ask you a couple things. You have first, your book, Never Forget to Laugh, is really one of my favorites. I have so many highlights in there. It's a biography about Bill Thetford, but it's so much more. It's a really fun read. You learn so much about Bill, so much about yourself and forgiveness in the early days with A Course in Miracles. Can you tell people a little bit about that, where to find it, and you have any updates about it?
Yes, I have just, I'm just finally about out of my second printing, and I'm going now only to it's a Kindle version. I've just finished creating the audio version, and it's on our website, and it's in the process of being distributed to all of the places out there that make audiobooks available. We're excited about that. And once I get that out of my hair, so to speak, then I will have the printed book be available as a print on demand, rather than my doing a third printing and mailing them all out and so on. So, yes, Bill's story is such a comfort to so many people. And I'll swear what's fascinating is the number of people who have written who say, I can feel his guidance. I can feel that he's here. Now, if one or two people did that, that would be one thing. But a lot of people seem to really feel him around. One woman, who's a young woman who never met him, she wasn't even born until after he left, said, oh, I miss him so much. It's like, I don't know how you could miss somebody you never met, but I guess she felt like she had met him.
But Carol, remember, you told us, and I believe it's absolutely true, that you did it in concert with him. It was a partnership.
Yes, it was a joint project. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. So if you come to our website, carolhowe.com, there's now a new page up that says audiobooks, and that's got downloads to your phone. And in the next few weeks, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 or 5 or something, it'll be out all over the place in many outlets for audiobooks.
Great. And also, I want to give you a plug too for your podcast called A Course in Miracles Daily Lessons, which is you reading each lesson, each from the textbook or the workbook, sorry, and then you give some context around it, which I find very helpful. All this will be included in the show notes for everybody, so you don't have to worry about remembering it. Carol,
we have a lot of people who have found that very helpful, because I just went through and I thought, there are a lot of people, there will be a word or two that's actually a key word, but it might not be a word that's in everybody's lexicon. In other words, they don't know what that word means. And so sometimes just making clear what a single word is unlocks the meaning of that lesson.
So true. I can vouch for that. Mm-hmm. Carol, thanks so much for coming on the show and extending your miracle voice to listeners. I learned a lot today, and I'm going to go work on the Hanks in my life. So thank you.
It's been absolutely a joy. Yes, I'd love for us to do it again. Anytime you're ready, I'm ready.
And Carol, thanks for walking the path with me for so many years.
Oh, wow. It's been such a treasure. Absolutely a treasure. And I love having you as my big sister. And
don't remind me. I'm getting...
Well, you're only barely my big sister. So...
No.
So Judy, are you saying maybe you just say sister? That would be okay with you instead of big sister?
No, I'm going to say 90 is nifty.
Okay. Well, thank you both. This was a joy.
Wonderful. Love to you both. I can't wait for us to meet again.
Thanks so much for listening today. Please subscribe to Miracle Voices by hitting the subscribe button on your podcast app. If you are enjoying these conversations, please consider leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever podcast app you use. And lastly, please visit us at miraclevoices.org and join our newsletter so we can stay connected. Until the next podcast, I want to leave you with my favorite Course quote: when you want only love, you will see nothing else.